Welcome everyone to another OBSEA session. I'm hoping that now where you're at is that at the very minimum you have a decent idea in your head of what you're wanting to do. Okay? And ideas are great, ideas are a fantastic starting point, but then there's a whole journey to move that idea from an idea to a proper business plan. Because eventually if you do this properly and if you want to set up a social enterprise just like any other business, you're going to actually have to write some kind of form of business plan. The pitches that you're going to give are sort of the very early embryonic aspects of a business plan. But after that, if you want more funding beyond OBSEA, if you want to go to the bank manager and get money, if you want to go to other foundations and whatever, you need to be able to show that you've moved your idea forward from just simply an idea, which is not diminutive, but to actually saying this can be a potential social enterprise. There is a business element, both the social element of the business enterprise and the business element of the enterprise. So what I want to give you today is basically a tool or a technique that is now commonly used across all sorts of businesses, small businesses, large businesses, straight businesses, social enterprises, to start mapping out what your idea looks like in a bit more detail. Okay? It's not to the stage of a complete feasibility plan. Okay? That's not the intention. But it's a good mapping exercise to say, how would this idea start working in practice? So I'm going to talk, unfortunately, but please interrupt, ask questions and intervene for the first probably 40 minutes, just to give you an idea of what this tool is. But then I'm going to give you the tool and you're going to work on it. Business model canvas. Business model canvas is, as the word implies, is really us trying to take the idea out of the head and put it on a canvas, almost paint a business. Look at the high level view of our business, okay? And this is the key thing, okay? Key thing of the business model canvas, or of a business model describes at the high level how your business delivers, creates, organizes value, okay? So all companies, whether they're businesses, organizations and whatever, to make money, and remember you need to make money, they need to create value, okay? And if you look at any kind of business, whether it's a social enterprise, whether it's a large business, etc., and you stream it down at the absolute basics, you've got three elements. You've got a series of inputs coming from the outside, then you've got this big box called a company, where you do certain things to those inputs. Okay, and it might be intellectual manipulation, it might be physical manipulation or assembly, whatever. So you have a whole series of processes in this box that is called your company, and then hopefully you have some outputs. Okay, and what comes out needs to be better than what's gone in. It needs to be different, aggregated, processed, and whatever. And it's that processing that creates value. There is one problem though. You might be creating value, but you might not be able to capture value. In other words, you could end up operating at a loss. Okay? Can I borrow your Apple phone? Does Apple produce this phone? Do you know? If they do they manufacture this phone? No. What do? They design it. They design it. Then they get it produced by someone else in your country. Is it Foxconn? Big, large assembly manufacturing. Okay, so they outsource all the manufacturing, so they do all the design, outsource the manufacturing, and then they do all the marketing. Absolutely. Okay, so where they add value is in the design process and in the marketing process. They don't necessarily do the manufacturing. Okay. Now, Apple is one of the most profitable companies in the world because they're able to capture most of the value in this value chain of inputs, production, and outputs. In other words, to put it bluntly, they're able to squeeze incredibly low prices from their suppliers. In fact, just big in the news at the moment, one of the big suppliers of Apple has gone bankrupt because of such a low margins that Apple had squeezed out of them. Okay, and then they're able to squeeze out, on what side do they squeeze out? They squeeze out from suppliers, so they drive a real hard bargain, And what do they where else do they squeeze out?
Consumers.
Consumers, okay? If you buy an Apple laptop, it has at least 30-40% premium compared to a similarly produced Dell computer and whatever. They have been so clever at their marketing, rightly or wrongly, I'm not putting any ethical judgment on it, that they've convinced you that having an Apple laptop is much, much, much better than having a Dell laptop, almost 40% better. So they've been able to capture a lot of the value they create, okay? You can't capture it all, because otherwise all your suppliers go out of business, and if your suppliers go out of business, then you're also in trouble, okay? And you can't be too greedy on the consumer side, okay? But you need to make sure that you capture value. So this business model canvas is trying to show you, first of all, what is the layout of your idea and how you're going to create value in your organization. In your case, it might be value for beneficiaries of the social enterprise. You will need also to define what value is. Let me return this very precious phone. So remember, a whole series of inputs, a whole series of value-adding activities that we call processes that you do in your company, either directly or indirectly by outsourcing, and then the output. And that, at that level, let me assure you, is exactly the same from Apple all the way to the smallest, tiniest social enterprise. Those processes are common for everyone. Let's start with all these building blocks of this canvas, okay? And the first thing that we need to start with is the customer, okay? And we will see in the social enterprise, when we go an example, you have more than one customer. Obviously, Apple has more than one typology of customers. You might end up with the customers you sell products to, but also the customers that you serve as beneficiaries. And there might be two very different people, okay? But basically, customers, okay, are the people that you serve as an organization, the people that you look after as a social enterprise. So who are your customer groups? And we talked about last week when we had a session about some of the issues in Oxford and Oxfordshire. I talked about immersion, the need for you to really, as we say in marketing, same thing in social enterprise, you really need to start with a company. Never ever start with a product or a service without understanding your customer. Okay? Because the only way to be really successful in your social enterprise is to be absolutely clear who you're serving and make sure that you understand their needs as they come from them, not as you imagine them to be. Okay? I said last week, I'll repeat it for those who are not here, we often get pitches that say, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for the homeless people of Oxford, or insert variable. And then we say, well, have you spoken to them? Have you spent time with them? Do you understand? No, but this is a great idea and I'm sure they're going to like it. Well, rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Okay, you really need to, and I'm not saying particularly for the Trite Awards it might be a bit more conceptual, but as you start moving, doing serious stuff, really starting up your social enterprise business, you need to make sure that you have a good understanding of who your customers are, what their needs are, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. The next important bit where I want to spend a bit time is this whole concept of value proposition. What is this value that you're creating? What does it mean to your customers? Okay? And this is, I want to spend a little bit of time on this because often, both in business and in social enterprises, we give an outline of what we're going to do in a very descriptive manner. We say, well, I'm going to do a restaurant, and a certain restaurant is going to employ the homeless, or I'm going to do, I don't know, a theatre company, and whatever. Now, that's the descriptive element, okay? So, yeah, it's a restaurant, it's a theatre company, but what is the value that that restaurant delivers? Because McDonald's is a restaurant, Toast Kitchen, which is a social enterprise down the road, is a restaurant, or cafe restaurant. There's thousands of restaurants. But different restaurants deliver very different value propositions. So what I'm inviting you to do when you do your proposal is saying, go beyond what's on the tag. I'm going to do a restaurant, I'm going to do a training center and whatever, and say, okay, what is the specific value that that entity is trying to deliver to customers? Okay, and try to articulate your proposition. Yes, say it's a restaurant, but then explain what the value is. Here's the value proposition a bit more mapped out. This is an interval. It's not, it won't show on your canvas, okay? But it's really the interplay between your product or service and the customers. This is again about understanding the countermeasures. What are their wants? What are their needs? What are their fears? What are the barriers? Okay, that's the minimum you should try to understand. Do you know what the difference is between a want and a need?
Needs must be satisfied.
Yes, and what about wants?
You cannot live
Desire.
without a need, or a need you need to live, or that's something you need to survive.
Yeah, okay. So, do you think that because we're doing social enterprise we should disregard this and go back to basics and just do needs? No.
No.
Yeah? So you need to really factor in not just the needs, but also the wants. Okay, and understand that. What are the fears? In other words, for example, what are the barriers that are stopping people taking your service? Last week we heard Richard talking about some categories that, you know, they would never set foot into a university, let alone a school or university or whatever, to get training because they've been brought up to say that's the authorities, that's the people I'm always fighting with. There's no way, there's this psychological barrier, okay, that will stop them from consuming your product or using your product. When I'm saying consuming your product, I'm talking in a social enterprise sense, not the toothpaste or Palmolive or Unilever or whatever, okay, product or service, okay. So you really, really need to understand that. You also need to understand substitutes. What are people currently using instead of what you're trying to propose? Are there alternatives to what you're proposing, and are people using that? Okay? So that's on the customer side. On the product, but this applies also as a service, what are the benefits that you're delivering to your customer? Okay? What does it do? Okay? What are the features? What makes up the features of your product? And there can be tangible features, intangible features. Okay? And very important, what is the experience that you're giving? Every product, whether it's a product or a service, will give you some kind of experience. So what can you map the experience that you're trying to give to your beneficiaries and or your company customers? And I'll make that distinction in a second. Okay? So really, when you're starting articulating your value proposition, yes, say it's a restaurant, but then say, well, let's start thinking about my clients and let's start thinking about what kind of experience. I mean, the experience you get at McDonald's, it's obviously very different from the experience that you get from, I don't know, Paul Bocu's restaurant or whatever, yeah? But you need to really articulate that. They both have restaurant on the title, but I'm hoping that you'll agree with me that the value proposition is slightly different. Nothing wrong or bad, there's no value judgment, but you really need to start describing your product or services in this area. So, once you've got your customers, and once you've got your products or services, there's a small problem. You need to deliver these services to your customers. So that's where we start talking about distribution channels. Okay? How do you make your products accessible to consumers? Okay? And distribution channels, you could have 3-hour session or 5-hour session on this because they vary a lot whether you're talking about products, whether you're talking about services. Okay? With products, we're trying to get the products close to the consumer. So if it's fast-moving physical goods or whatever, you have the whole wholesale chain who takes your product from the production side all the way to as close as possible to the customer. It might be the local health center, it might be the local retailer that will have your product stocked in, whatever. But if it's services, what you're trying to do with distribution is the other way around. You're trying to bring often, not always, the customer to your service. Okay? So how are you going to distribute? And this is often not thought very well through. I'm not talking advertising now. We're just talking about how you're going to bring the customer to the delivery place of the service, or how you're going to take the products that you want to sell to the customer. Are you going to use an external wholesaler? Are you going to use existing more traditional distribution channels like supermarkets or whatever to distribute your product? Okay? And you need to understand that in here, you will have a series of costs. So managing a distribution channel, running a distribution channel, will have a cost. And we'll see in the exercise different examples of distribution channels and how to go about it. Quite linked to this, but separate, is actually customer relationships. How are you going to build and maintain relationships with your client groups? How are you going to make sure that they stick to your product or service, that they participate? How do we maintain relationships with you on the OBSEA program? You're our customers on this program, aren't you? How do we maintain relationships?
Email contact.
Sorry?
Email.
Email contact, yes. What else?
Incentives.
Sorry?
Incentives.
Well, incentives.
Like the leadership certificate thing.
Leadership certificate, the awards at the end. We're not trying to lure you with food, but we're trying to create a community atmosphere. We always wanted, I'm Italian, so when I designed this program, I said, there has to be a meal on every single session, okay? I was hoping it would be a bit more high-end meals, like all of us sitting around the table. That didn't quite work with the budgets, but, you know, it just makes a difference, okay? So how are you going to keep your customers close to you? How are you going to keep them coming back until you fulfill what their needs are, etc.? Okay? How do you, good communication, engagement, sense of community, peer networking. There's a whole thing, but you need to start thinking about it. Okay? And obviously communication is the big one, and we've got loads of, the nice news is thanks to the internet and thanks to particularly Web 2.0 application and social media, we've got loads of tools to do a really, really good job on that. Okay, so customer relationships to keep the customer close. Now, all of these activities, okay, hopefully going well, will have your cash register, and I know it sounds awful to talk about this in social entrepreneurship, but will hopefully generate revenue. And let me take a little bit of a break here, because this is very, very important. I have, not with everyone, but often discussions say, how can you possibly think, not even revenues, even more profit? How can you think of profit in a social enterprise? You're ripping off, you know, you're doing something for the homeless and you're trying to make a profit. Of course you are. Of course you are. Because that profit in a social enterprise, as opposed to another one, will be reinvested to have even more impact, to even more homeless. And unless you're making a profit, okay, unless you're making money, then the whole thing falls apart. Then you might be a charity where you're asking other people for money, okay, but you're not a social enterprise. Now, there's a whole range. I'm not saying that your social enterprise has to be 100% self-sufficient and generating all of its income through trading, but it should generate most of its income through trading. So nothing wrong with getting government support, funding agencies, absolutely. But if that's 100% or what your income is, then you're a charity. You're not a social enterprise. And then when you enter a crisis, like we've been in the last 5 years, and governments cut back, your charity falls apart. And that's why there's a queue now, which is about 5 miles long, of charities that are coming knocking at our doors, other consultants' doors, and saying, help, 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 how can we move from charity status to social enterprise? Teach us how to be a social enterprise, because there's no more money in the coffers of the government. We relied on that, and we're about to fold, literally. And hundreds of charities, particularly the smaller ones, have folded. Now, there's no magic wand, as usual. Social enterprise can go belly bust, and when you got a period of recession, even businesses and social enterprises are affected. But at least if you've done your work properly, you've diversified your income sources or whatever, you're not dependent entirely on a government of whatever persuasion, but you're dependent on your customers, okay? Which might also have to tighten the belts and give you less money, but at least you've got a diversified base, okay? So now, the important thing when you start doing this exercise, and when I'll give you the piece of paper where you're going to do this exercise, here is not thinking about the amount of revenue that you're going to make, but it's the type of revenue. So what kind of revenue are you going to make? Is it revenue coming through advertising? Is it revenue coming through sales of products? Is it based on markup, so you get a merchant rate and then you put a markup? Or is it revenue based on commissions? Okay, so you need to understand what kind of revenue, more the type rather than the quantity. So here in your exercise, I don't want to see I'm planning to make £3,000. I want to see I'm planning to make 30% of my revenues from advertising, another 20% for selling products, not to the beneficiaries, but a high markup to people that have lots of disposable income, so that allows me to sell the other products much more cheaper or give them away for free or whatever business model that you want to adopt. So here we're looking at where are the revenues going to come from and what type of revenues you have rather than just the quantity. Of course, then when you do down the track, after the OBSEA program, when you're actually setting up a business, you also need to do a profit and loss projection and all that kind of stuff. But at the moment, we're just trying to identify the type of revenues and where that revenue is going to come. You know, it could be what's the mix between trade-generated revenues and funding-generated revenues, so to see how much you're dependent on governments or funders' money and how much you are dependent on your own trade. Okay, so it's an understanding of your revenue model. So remember that we said input, processes, and outputs. What then you need to understand in your business or your business idea is what are the keys, so the high-level resources that you're going to need to operate your business. Is it technological stuff? Is it like hugely dependent on human resources? Is it dependent on, you know, you need inputs of materials? Okay, so what are the key resources that you need to drive in your business? Yeah? So if you're in the building business, what key resources would you need?
Timber, bricks.
Timber, bricks, some kind of machinery, some kind of labor, etc. If you're manufacturing computers, it's a different story. Yeah? So what are the key resources? And this could be human resources, financial resources that you need to operate your business, because somehow you're going to need to get those. So you need to get a good understanding. Now, we're not going to the nitty-gritty of everything. You know, we're not going down to say, oh, we're going to need paper and staples. Every business does paper and staples. But what are the key things that distinguish your business from another business? Okay? So a computing company will not need bricks and mortars and whatever, but a building company will. Opposite, a computing company might need, you know, all the sort of hardware needed, memory chips and whatever, but not need bricks and mortar. Some companies and some exercises are people resource intensive, so all you need is people and nothing else almost. Some others you can't, they're much more other type of resource intensive. So you really need to think, what are the key resources, what kind of access you have to those resources, okay? So to know where you can do your business. Now, all those resources need to be manipulated, because if it's just resources in from the input and then you send the same resources out, you're not adding value. What you're doing in the business is you're manipulating that, okay? With all these resources, you will have a series of processes, okay? So key activities in a car manufacturing thing will be actually the manufacturing and putting all these parts together. In some of your things, the key activities will be delivering training, or will be delivering preparation and delivery of food in a restaurant and whatever. So what are the key activities and how do you mix the resources? Okay? Last but not least are key partners. Okay? Most companies don't live in isolation. They work in partnership with other companies. Okay? So who will be your key partners in the production? So key partners for Apple are Foxconn. Foxconn is a massive company in China that basically assembles just about everything, the final product for. They assemble all the iPhones, they assemble all the iPads, etc. So that would be a key partner for Apple. They now do their own chips, but before that, when they outsourced and got the chips from someone else, chip manufacturer would have been a key partner because it's a central part of the production of Apple. So who are the key partners for you? Is it the government who's giving you key funding? There's a lot of government programs that you tap into to make your social enterprise work? Is it other donors? Is it other companies, partners that deliver other products or services that you need, okay, to deal with. And what's important here is that most social enterprises, if you see here in Oxfordshire, for example, are trying to make sure that they create a social enterprise ecosystem. So they're trying to make sure that wherever possible, they get other social enterprises as key partners. So for example, if you look at Turf Street Kitchen, wherever they can, they don't satisfy not even remotely all of their demands, but wherever they can, they get their produce, particularly fruits and vegetables, from Cultivate, which is another social enterprise, okay? And they try to get the deliveries from delivery vans that are of social enterprises, etc. So if you're feeding off each other, and if you are trying to get key partners which are also social enterprises, then you start moving away from just having a single social enterprise by creating that ecosystem. Not only that, if you're playing with key partners, you want partners that have your same ideals, your same ethos, that you know you're traveling in a certain direction with. So if you can, and you always won't be able to do it all the time, but try to get your key partners as other social enterprises. So you basically generate some net value for the social entrepreneurship movement as a whole, rather than just individual. This quadrant is the bit that generates your cost. You will have cost to get key resources. You will have cost to run the processes, okay? You will have costs of all sorts of things. You might have costs from key partners in the sense that they'll bill you for what they're supplying to you, okay? So this is all the cost area. And just like in the revenue that we said, right, it's not about the amount of revenue, but it's typologies of revenue. What is really, really important, and that you start to understand, what is the nature of your cost base? Are most of your costs labor costs? Are most of your costs technology costs? Are most of your costs leasing costs, or land or bricks and mortars? Where are your major cost base? You could also have to start thinking, and I'm trying to stay away from business lingo, but it's really, really important, particularly when you start then looking down the track at cash flow. What's the proportion of fixed cost and variable costs? Are you familiar with the concept of fixed cost and variable cost? Please say if you're not, because I'm happy to explain it. I'm conscious. Okay. So, fixed costs are costs in a business that, to a certain degree, are going to be there independently from the amount of customers that you have. Okay? So it might be that let's say that you start a restaurant, okay? That you don't buy the building, but you're leasing the building, so you're renting it, okay? So you enter a contract with the landlord, and you're going to say, I'm going to rent this beautiful room to transform into a restaurant, and it's £12,000 a year or £20,000 a year, okay? That's a fixed cost. Whether there's one client or whether there's 30 clients in your restaurant, it doesn't change your rent cost. It's going to be the same, yeah? But for example, the cost of food might be variable, because if you've got 50 customers, you'll order 50 steaks, assuming it's a single menu, or proportionally, but if you've got 30, etc. So they vary proportionally with the variation in clientele, okay? Now, there's a lot of businesses that are very, very fixed cost intensive, and those are quite dangerous business. You can make some interesting profit, but it's businesses where you've got a series of costs that's going to be there no matter how many beneficiaries or clients you have, okay? So you need to know that in advance, because when you project your cash flow, when you project and say how much money is going to come in, how much money do I have to dispose, you know that that's a base, it's fixed. You know that you're going to have to pay, if it was, let's say it was 12,000 a year, every end of the month, you know you've got to pay £1,000 in rent, okay? So that's a fixed cost that you can forecast, okay? Some businesses are very heavy on fixed cost and very low on variable cost. Some other businesses have almost no fixed cost, because maybe they are, I don't know, software development company, where it's basically your bedroom, a laptop, and you do the coding, okay? So you need to get a good understanding of the typologies of cost and where your cost is going to come from. What proportion of your cost is going to be labor and wages. Now, obviously, it changes over time, okay? At the moment, you're thinking startup, and you need to think of all those things. So here now you've got a map of revenues, and you've got a map of cost, and in theory, what should happen? Would you want the revenues to be higher or lower than your costs? Higher, because then what happens to the difference? Difference between revenues and costs. Profit, yeah? So the difference between what you take in and all your costs, what's left over, is your profit. Now, without going too technical, that's your gross profit. Then you have to take away taxes and all that kind of stuff. Remember, CICs are not exempt from tax. You still have to pay tax and everything, okay? So those are all considerations that you have to keep in mind. We're not asking you now for your pitches to have detailed breakdowns of this, but we're asking you to show that you've got an understanding. Let's say, well, if I'm planning to deliver this, I know the ballpark figure to deliver this, I need at least 5 staff, okay? Often you say, oh, we're going to service, 7,000 beneficiaries with education programs, and there's going to be all these classes. And then in the next sentence to say, and it's just going to be me. And we go, and how are you going to deliver? Are you going to be sort of bilocating somehow? Okay. So you need to show, not to the millimeter, not to the end, but you thought your business through in that sense. Okay. So if you're delivering a certain amount of training classes, do you have the resources? Do you have the staff to do it? Or if maybe it's going to be small enough for you to do it by yourself, but then show me that it's small enough. Okay. And the revenues are not going to be there that high. As a summary, here are all the bits and pieces. Remember, we're starting with the customer, understanding the customer, then creating a value proposition that satisfies the needs, the wants, and takes away the fears of the customer. Then we need to find the way to get the products or services to the customer, or the customer to the agencies that deliver whatever, the training, etc. We need to find a way to have an ongoing relationship with a customer, and that relationship might be finite. It might be that you take them to a certain degree because that's what your brief is, and then that's it, and then ideally this customer is done and finished, but sometimes they're much longer relationships, okay? We need to understand the revenue structures, and then on the cost side we need to be very, very clear what are the resources we need, okay? Human resources, capital resources, infrastructure resources. Key activities, what do we do with those resources? How do we mix them up to create this value? Okay. Who are the key partners, external partners that will help us do that? Never try to do everything by yourself. Wherever possible, outsource, get other suppliers that do it better. Okay. And all of this stuff will create some costs that we need to understand. Hopefully then, the difference between these two will give you some nice profit, not outrageous profit, that means you're ripping off someone, but a decent profit that in the case of a CIC, you then reinvest in this CIC to expand your business to have more impact. So first year you served 5 homeless people, made a nice profit, you expand your operation. Next year you'll be able to service 8 or 10 or 800 or whatever. Okay? There is nothing, let me repeat it loudly, there is nothing wrong with the word profit. What's wrong is how profit is made, if it's made with ethos or without ethos, and then how profit is used. Okay? But profit per se is not a bad word. Yeah? We've been used for too much of companies that make profit by destroying the environment, ripping off other people, etc., and pocketing all the profit and using it to further destroy the environment or whatever. It's not the profit that's wrong, it's how it's been done. Okay? If you do all of these things, okay, looking after the environment, being decent, okay, first of all, there's already many studies that show that your resilience as a company will be much, much stronger. Okay? But secondly, then, if you use that profit to re-engage with it, there is fantastic, it's the best world in the world. Okay? So don't be scared of profit. It's not evil. So, from here, what we're going to do now is basically overlay this on this piece of paper. I'm going to give you many copies of these. So we can start thinking, and this is what we're going to spend the rest of the evening doing, we can start mapping down your ideas on this piece of paper. Okay? So, okay, some of you might have not had enough time to understand fully customer segments, but I'm sure that you imagine who your beneficiaries will be. Okay? So describe the offer. Here's called offer rather than value proposition. And then it's up to you to start filling in. This is a reiterative process. You look at it, you map it, you think about it, then you scramble this one up and do another one and improve it, pass it around, get people to think, look at it, Okay, so it's a good first step from taking that generic idea, vague idea, or what you think is quite a precise idea, but it's all in your head. This is the first step of bringing it down on paper. The next step that we're not going to do will be then moving from here to a full business plan or feasibility plan of your business, assuming that you want to do a business. Now, some of you might be doing just a small project. It's fine. But this also helps you if you're doing a small project. You then don't have to do a whole feasibility plan, okay? And you don't have to do a feasibility plan for the pitch, yeah? Don't worry. But at least this gets you started thinking about this. So, a couple of examples. Okay, very often this is done on big boards like this, and people start, particularly if it's a collaborative thing, people start using sticky notes and putting their ideas, their thoughts on who the customer should be, what should be the offer. It can be a collaborative exercise. And you can do it collaboratively today if you don't have your own personal idea that you want to build. So let's give a quick example. Are you all familiar with KIVA? Have you ever heard about KIVA? No? So KIVA is one of the first lending platforms. Okay, it's almost like microcredit bank, okay, based on online lending platform. And the idea was to automate microcredit for what they define as poor entrepreneurs. So people that in the third world or developing countries that want to start a business but don't have the resources, money resources to do that, but have like you, an entrepreneurial idea and whatever, connecting those people with people in developing countries or even in developed countries or even in developing countries that might have some cash, small amounts of cash that they can lend to these people, microcredit, so small amounts of lending, so these people can start a business and then they repay back the loan plus interest. Again, is that exploiting the poor?
No.
You're charging interest. I'm giving you £45. I'm rich and you're poor. I'm giving you £45 and I'm even asking interest from you.
Depends on what is the interest.
Absolutely. Again, back like a profit. It depends what the interest is in. If I'm a loan shark and whatever, yes, that's bad. But if the interest is reasonable for both parties and I'm enabling you to start your business and you're able to repay it, that's great. And if then I use that profit to give to you who are also in need, etc., then that's great, okay? So KIVA is basically one of the first examples of an online platform for microcredit. Microcredit had been around for at least 25 years before KIVA came along, but KIVA were one of, there's now plenty of them that did an online platform for that, okay? So to connect people. And so here's an example of how it sort of works, okay? So this is the idea in a nutshell, okay? So one side is wealthy Westerners. I know it's a bit generalist, assuming that all the wealth is in the West and the other ones, but anyhow. Wealthy Westerners, okay, through the kiva.org platform, lend to entrepreneurs that don't have resources. They lend money to start their business, okay? So the offer is basically loan to the poor. One of the customer segments, because they are customers of the bank, let's say that this is the bank, is wealthy Westerners. Now this is the interesting bit. See how here you've got two customer segments. And you're going to have this very, very often in a lot of business models for social enterprises. Because you're going to have, often you will have a business model where one of your customers are the beneficiaries, the homeless, the poor entrepreneurs, or whatever your beneficiaries are. But another customer might be the customer that buys your premium product, okay, or that supplies some resources that then you use to serve the other customer. Not sure if that makes sense. Are you familiar with Tom's Shoes? Anyone familiar with the Tom's Shoes brand?
One-for-one model.
One-for-one model, yeah? Okay, so Tom's Shoes basically has two customers. Tom's Shoes is basically a brand of shoes, okay? And the idea is find a business model where you are producing trendy shoes but very simple to produce. So if you see the Tom's models, the shoes are very, very basic shoes, okay? That you can produce and sell in the Western world at a substantial profit, okay? And then for every pair of shoes that you sell to a client here, you donate a pair of shoes in a developing country. Okay? So built on that is this what they called one-for-one model. So Tom Shoes has now branched out in eyeglasses. Okay? And so if you buy a pair of specs of glasses here, someone in Kenya or someone in Nepal gets a free cataract operation. Okay? So then you end up with two customers. One of the customers here, okay, that buy your expensive Tom shoes that have a very high profit margin, but the other ones are your beneficiaries in Kenya and Nepal that are receiving the shoes. Or one's the customer here that is buying the glasses at a noticeable premium, and the other customer is the beneficiary that gets the eye cataract operation in Nepal, etc. So you will often have a situation where under customers you're looking both at the people that you're trying to look after, but also the people that you're trying to extract in a positive way money from. Okay? So distribution channels, yes, on one side we've got a platform, but at the local level, so that's the international online thing, but then at the local level, the people that actually physically give the loans and do all the security, all the risk assessment, etc., are partners, which are local microfinance institutions. So these are the distribution partners. One is online distribution. The other one's, remember that this box was distribution, or distribution channels. Yeah? Do you remember that? Make sense? Please tell me if I've lost you. Stop me if I've lost you. Okay? And so here the offer is loans, in specific terms, microloans. Okay? Revenue streams, okay? What do you think are the revenue streams? Here it says optional donations, so on top of the loan, donors can say, I'll give you a £45 loan at X amount of interest, but I'm also giving you a donation. So what are the revenue streams for KIVA? How do they make money?
Cut the interest.
The interest. So the interest is how they make money. Now they will need to, as you said, a cut of it because part of it goes to the local microfinance institutions. But KIVA makes money out of the interest and also a small proportion of the donation. I think it's 0.5% of any donation that goes there. Okay, so that is their revenue stream. Okay, so what we would say here is based on interest rates, on a percentage. Okay, both in terms of interest rate, but also percentage of the donation. Right, activities and partners. In terms of activities, okay, they have obviously managing the platform because that's the main distribution, so all the management, all the updating of the software, all the redesigning of the website, keeping that going, okay? A lot of the things that they do is they screen these microfinance institutions to see that the partners are working okay, okay? And then risk management, that's a big thing of any kind of lender. They need to manage their risks. They need to manage the risks that en masse all these people are not going to pay back, okay? By the way, in most microcredits, the default on loans is way, way lower than in the Western world. You would think these are poor people, they're not going to make it, they're going to default, or they're going to run away with their £45 or whatever. Absolutely. If you look at the statistics on defaults on microcredit, on microcredit at work, far, far lower than defaults that you get in the West. Very, very committed to repaying back the loans. Okay? But nevertheless, KIVA needs to do a whole risk management, both with the final clients, but also with the microfinance institutions that do then that in the field. Key resources, obviously the absolute key resources, the whole thing in this case works mainly on the KIVA platform. It's all about maintaining that platform. Okay? Is it labor intensive? If it's an online business, are online businesses labor intensive? Normally. Sorry? At the beginning, there's a bit of development stuff, okay? But the nice thing of online businesses, and if you can look at online businesses for your social enterprise, that's the way to go, guaranteed, okay? The beautiful things of online systems is, first of all, you have some initial startup costs that can be very high, particularly if it's high technical. So developing this platform is very costly. But the nice thing of online system is that then they scale up beautifully. Once you've got the platform and you've got that initial investment, whether that platform is doing 1 transaction a month or 10 million transactions a month, you don't have an increase in costs. You've got that very fixed upfront invest cost, and then you've got almost no cost, very little. In terms of, obviously, you still have staff and whatever, but it's not labor intensive, okay? So obviously the key resources here is the KIVA platform, that's the main resource. Obviously there will be other ones, but remember we're looking at key aspects. Partner network, okay? Key partners in this, all the payment and transactions, remember they're giving loans or whatever, the key partner is PayPal, which is one of the major payment systems. And of course, key partners on the ground are the same thing here, the local microfinance institutions that manage at the territory level all these things, okay? KIVA, they want to stay as an online platform. They could have said, let's do this. What would that mean if they decide to do it in-house? Rather than a lot of labor in a lot of countries. So why not outsource that with key partners, okay? Obviously you need to do a risk assessment on the key partners because it's of the nature of the lending, but then you have a network for which you don't have cost, and you only pay them on results through the commissions and through a profit share on the credits. Particularly when in startup mode, you want to be as lean as possible and as focused. So KIVA was very much focused on just let's get the platform right and outsource everything else to key partners and key suppliers.
Excuse me, what about products? What's the word? Everything is above board and everything is of good quality.
That is risk management. That's the whole risk management thing. In terms of with loans, it's more about risk rather than quality, because if I give you £50 loan, it's £50 loan. You're looking at the quality of the notes in a sense. What I want to see is the risk of either these people stuffing up or not doing the right stuff, not doing the right screening, or the final customer not repaying. Those are the major areas of risk. So these people have to have the expertise to be able to say, I need to give credit to people that I think have the right business model to repay. So they don't just give microcredit to anyone. These people do mini pitches just like you do and say, I want to set up a small tailor business and this is what I'm planning to do and whatever. And if the microfinance thinks that this person, usually women that do all the work, okay, is worth it, they think there's a decent business there, that it can work and whatever, then they lend the money. Okay? So there is that quality control that goes on at 2 levels. First, KIVA doing quality control on local microfinance institutions, and then once they're approved, local microfinance institutions doing quality control on the final customer to whom they're going to give the money. Does that make sense? Yeah. So as you can see, these are all quite high level. In any kind of business, like key resources, I'm sure that they've got staff. I'm sure that they've got offices, but it's not the key resource. The key resource for that business is the platform. You pull the platform away and that business is gone, even if they've got the buildings and whatever. Okay. Now you can expand a little bit more than that, but the idea is to say what are the key resources of this business and what are the key activities of this business. And keep it, remember, this is a broad brush painting, it's not the detail painting. The detail painting will come later with a business plan. We're taking it one step at a time. We're moving from your idea to say, can this idea now translate to a painting? Are the customers from this idea? What are the cost implications of this idea? Where am I going to get revenues from this idea? So you start moving one step forward, but you don't have to have all the details. I mean, I didn't want to explain your KIVA in particular. I would just want to use KIVA as an example of what you're about to do with your project to start mapping it out on paper. I'll skip this one. There's an example here, and these will be all online. It's very similar. This is Grameen Bank, which is again another microcredit bank, and you will see fairly similar business model, yeah? Few references here if you should decide to go the academic route and read a few academic articles to put you to sleep at night. Here they are. Just a couple more slides just to talk about business models and whatever. Remember there's a sort of continuum, and they're not, they're overlapping, so they're not distinct boxes. You're moving towards charity, to different types of social enterprise, to different types of traditional businesses. And there's no one fits all. You might be in your business model somewhere along the spectrum. So here you got the pure charity, okay? So traditionally, all the funding comes from grants, donations, endowments, government funding, 100%, okay? Then you've got some charities like Oxfam that are starting to, increasingly, mainly this, but also say we need some other revenue streams. So they set up the Oxfam shops, they set up enterprises, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Then you start moving, once you're saying, right, more than 75%, and that's not a fixed figure, but when you start saying, actually, the vast bulk of my revenues is not from donation, but it's from market activities, from training, then you start moving out from the charity zone and into the social enterprise zone, okay? And you go, you know, social enterprises where profits are completely reinvested in the social enterprise. There's no dividend to shareholders and whatever. Then you have, starting to go into traditional business, what they called mission-driven, for-profit social enterprises. Yes, they want to do the social good and whatever, but yes, they want to make money also for the shareholders, okay? And then you start moving to traditional businesses, the one that have some serious CSR activity, corporate social responsibility, starting to blend in the two. And then there you have the nasty businesses, the pure for profit, no CSR, screw everyone else. And that's where profit is bad, yeah? That's where it's only in the, and I'm not saying that all pure business, if you don't do CSR, you're completely a thief or whatever. People can also operate decent thing without having CSR activities. But here we're starting to go into the purely capitalist model that has created all the problems that you guys are trying now to solve, okay? In terms of ripping off resources, ripping off people, circulating profits in Jersey, Panama, Uruguay, you name it, and you know, Starbucks not paying taxes in the UK or just about not paying any taxes. So, you know, start thinking where you are. Obviously, I don't presume if you're doing a social enterprise you won't be here, but you could be anywhere, you know, in that spectrum. And that's absolutely fine. And things will evolve, things will change. As you said, you might have two things. What it is happening, though, is that we are increasingly seeing, even in large businesses, a shift. The pendulum is really shifting towards social enterprises. And they might be called social enterprises. Eventually, we say all businesses will be social businesses. But we're moving from this kind of stuff, and I'll let you read it, and moving from institutions, very much moving to communities, and moving to very, very different ways of doing business, which are some of the social enterprises that you're seeing around, that you've seen in your visits, and hopefully some of the social enterprises that you're going to build, okay? One thought, you remember I was telling you about online stuff and doing something online. This is a really interesting field. Who've heard about the sharing economy as a concept? Yes? Anyone? Hands up? Anyone? A couple of people. So sharing economy is starting to really question the way we use assets and also the attitudes to ownership. Why do we have to own everything? Okay? This is in general, from any kind of product or any kind of service. Why can't we share some things? Okay? The classic example is this one. On average, we use our car. I don't, because I don't have a car. But we use our car for 8% of the total time. Over 24 hours, we use it for 8% of those 24 hours. Over 365 days, we use it for. The rest of the times, it's either parked just downstairs from the office or parked on your street where your home is. Okay? That's where most of the time is. So why should you have an asset that's so expensive to build, so energy consuming to build, resource consuming to build, and do not maximize the asset? I don't want to even get the question whether you should have cars or not. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, why do you need to have full ownership of that car? Why can't it be, on a sharing economy, something that you share, that you don't own, and that you just use and pay for when needed? Okay? Lawn mowers, classic example. You've got a classic, you know, British bit of real estate or suburban real estate, all the little blocks, 78 blocks with 78 little gardens that get mown probably once a month. Okay, but everyone have their own lawn mower. Why couldn't you have a strip of 20 houses that share a lawnmower? Apart from everything, you could have a nice chat when you go and come into you and can I borrow your lawnmower? And it's an opportunity to have a chat. Okay? So there's a whole concept of moving away from full ownership, I'm not saying of everything, but for most things, to shared ownership. Okay? And that shared ownership can be in terms of leasing, it can be in terms of renting, it can be in terms of community. Now what's interesting here is that there's a whole stack of online markets to facilitate this. One of the obstacles to the sharing economy is that you don't know who has the asset that you need nearby you. Okay? And online platforms, through GPS, through the whole social network, should putting together markets, demand and supply, okay, facilitate this, okay? So who's familiar with Airbnb? One of the fastest growing areas for accommodation. What does Airbnb do? Sorry? It lets people home as accommodation. You're going away for a month, rather than you leaving your home empty, you rent it out for people to go on holiday. Okay? Now that has been around for 100 years. It's not new to Airbnb. Airbnb has just been phenomenally good at marketing it and phenomenally good at creating a really, just like KIVA has done, microcredit has been around much longer than KIVA. What Airbnb has done, it has created a very, very sleek platform on which to operate this. Now, that's on the global scales, but there's a lot of opportunities for small applications to be developed in the sharing economy on a much smaller scale. I've got a student who's working at the moment on a sharing applications for universities, just to share meals between university students. You know, so who's in my university and who wants to have people around for a meal? For free or for a charge. So the student makes a bit of money by sharing the meal provision, etc. And you'll be able to look that up on the app. Okay, you can build easily a revenue stream around that for the app owner, where even it's just selling the app. Okay, and anything that you do to facilitate the sharing economy, one could argue, why couldn't you have a CIC set up to do that? Yeah. So I'm not saying you all have to do that, but it's a pointer where it's an area where there's incredible opportunities to do something, particularly if you're interested in technology or at least know a mate that can do that. Okay? So creating platforms that facilitate sharing economy. Now obviously in the big areas this has already been done. Zip cars, anyone's familiar with zip cars? Okay? Again, that same concept of sharing. It's quite different from the leasing because you can have communities that get together and go to Zipcard and say, look, in Wolvercourt there's about 10 users of ours, can you get a car? So someone comes out, gets the demand, does an assessment of the demand, and then you get a car parked in the middle of Wolvercourt. Everyone has access code, everyone can go online and see who's using when and put a booking in, okay, and use it. At a cost, obviously. But at least you're paying for what you're using. You're not paying a fortune to have something that 90% of the time you're not using. There was a question here, okay, about what's available online and whatever. There's tons of stuff available online, okay? So if you go on YouTube and you do business model canvas, there's a whole series of videos. This is a great book that outlines in much more detail this whole thing. Maps it out much better. There's a Kindle edition. Paperback's gone up to £16, but so I would thoroughly recommend it. There might be some copies in the library, I'm not sure. Great little book. Right, I've talked way too much, so I suggest, can we now start mapping down your ideas on this piece of paper?